My name is Ekaterina. I am 29 years old. I've always been weak, both physically and mentally. As a child, I often felt vulnerable, and this, perhaps, could not but affect my life in the future. My mother raised me alone, and this year she turned 65. She was always worried about me, despite the fact that I was already an adult and at some point even began to realize that I needed to be more independent. Mom thought that if you weren't strong, you'd have to learn how to survive and make a living. She always told me, "Someday, Kat, there will come a moment when I won't be able to protect you. You have to be ready to stand up for yourself." I listened to her words, although deep down I did not believe that that day would ever come. It seemed to me that my life would go on somehow by inertia, in the same cozy rhythm in which I had existed all these years. But, as often happens, life forces us to change. Soon after I dropped out of school, I was faced with the real need to provide for myself. My mother, despite her care and love, could not support me all the time. Time has given me lessons that I couldn't ignore. I started learning on my own, through books, courses, and searching for information on the internet. At first, I could barely make ends meet, earning money from remote work. My first monthly income barely exceeded $300, but I was determined. Mom always told me, "You have to be strong, Kat. You can't rely on me alone." Her words seemed too harsh to me at that moment, but I realized their true meaning only after a while. Yes, it was difficult at first. I was worried, doubted my abilities and the correctness of my path. But gradually I became more confident in myself, and my financial situation improved. After several years of hard work, I have achieved much more than I expected. My income was significantly higher than the average for my age group, and I could afford not only comfort, but also independence. I could finally proudly say that my life does not depend on someone's words or approval. I built my own path. Over time, when my work stabilized, my mother began to feel relieved. She often said that she could sleep well now, knowing that I was on the right track. Her support became more restrained, and although she was still worried about me, her eyes filled with pride. "Your work is going well," she said. "I'm so happy that you found your place in life." My mother has always been a strong woman, despite her gentleness and caring. She worked for many years in the delicatessen department at the supermarket, and this work was not easy for her. Despite her kindness, she was endowed with an inner fortitude that allowed her not to give up even in the most difficult moments. But the years have made themselves felt. Working in a senior position, she was physically and mentally exhausted. She often said, "It's already hard for me, Kat. I do not know how much longer I can continue." It was her words that puzzled me and made me think. I felt that I could do more, that I could offer her something more than just money. Mom probably didn't expect such an initiative from me, but I suggested that she leave her job. "Mom, how long are you going to work?" I asked one day, unable to hide my concern, seeing how she was losing strength every day. "We can live on my income. Why don't you quit your job and start living in peace?" I didn't say this with the intention of turning her life into a carefree existence, but rather so that she could finally enjoy the time I could never afford. My mother was touched to the core. She looked at me with disbelief, but I knew that my words warmed her heart. She thanked me repeatedly, and tears of gratitude appeared in her eyes. And so, after a while, my mom really quit her job. I felt proud of her, as if it was my own achievement. She stopped being part of that exhausting and constant circle from which there was no way out, and was finally able to find peace. She began to enjoy retirement, sometimes helping me with work, but generally immersed in serenity. She began to go on trips with friends, arrange luxurious dinners for herself and pamper herself with what she had been putting off for so long. Working in a supermarket, she never had time for herself. But now that she had found freedom, her energy returned, and her face began to glow again with that lively joy that it had been deprived of. No matter how much work I had, I always stayed by my side. Every evening I sat down with her for dinner, and we talked about the day. These evenings have been a real comfort to me. We remembered everything: what happened in my life, how she spent her day, what news she was interested in. Even in the most stressful moments of work, I knew that I would spend this evening with my mother, and this gave me strength. I had lunch with a friend today. We met in a cozy cafe, where time seemed to slow down, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the atmosphere with peace. We discussed the latest events in our lives, and the conversation, as it often happens, smoothly turned to children. Her daughter had recently got married, and now she was a grandmother. The friend was beaming with happiness, talking about her grandson. It was the pride that every mother dreams of. Her eyes filled with light as she talked about how wonderful it was to see her little grandson growing up. How wonderful. Catherine, you're busy with your work, so maybe you don't have time for a relationship, but I hope that someday you'll find someone wonderful, she said with a warm but slightly worried expression on her face. Her words touched me. I always appreciate wise advice, but this time I felt a little awkward. Marriage. Yes, I've never really thought about marriage. And although the idea that one day I might meet someone I wanted to spend my whole life with seemed remote and unfeasible to me, I couldn't help but think about my mother's words. She always thought it was an important part of life. Marriage is not just a piece of paper, it is a bond between two people. It is love on which everything else is built, she often repeated, and at these moments I may have begun to believe in her words. On the other hand, I couldn't remember a moment when I would have spent time in a romantic relationship. Remembering my childhood and adolescence, I realized that I had no real friends, and even more so I did not communicate with the opposite sex. My health has always left me little space for a normal life. I was admitted to the hospital, then discharged again, and each time it became more and more difficult to return to my previous form. At some point, I had to drop out of school to improve my health. And this period in my life left its mark. I could not fully build relationships like everyone else. However, as my mother said, perhaps if there is the right connection, marriage and children can become something important and necessary. Maybe there's still a chance that my life will find the meaning that I've been missing. I felt like this wish might come true one day. It was a strange feeling, almost like an unexpected epiphany, that sometimes you need to allow yourself to believe in the best, in dreams that are not so impossible. I decided to take a morning off and change my usual way of life a little. I went to the mall alone, for the first time in a long time. The place where I once loved to walk, but hadn't been for a long time, now seemed a little alien. I wandered around the halls, enjoying the silence and the time that I didn't have to share with work or obligations. A display of jewelry caught my attention, and I decided to go into one of the shops. It was not only for me, but also because my mother's birthday was approaching soon, and I wanted to choose something special for her. Inside the store, I was greeted by a young salesman who immediately approached me with a friendly smile. "Are you looking for a gift?" "I'll be happy to help," he said, and I nodded gratefully. "Yes, I need to choose a necklace for my mother." "Maybe you can recommend something?" I replied. It was my first meeting with Oliver, and I couldn't have expected how much it would affect my whole life. He was attentive and helpful, immediately offering several options that fit my request. "A gift for your mother is wonderful. I'll show you some recommendations." "Do you have a budget?" he asked with a smile. A little embarrassed, I replied that I did not have a specific budget, but if something turned out to be suitable, I was ready to buy. Oliver showed me some jewelry, and I suddenly felt how easy it was for us to find a common language. We chatted, discussed design, materials, and over time the conversation became more personal. It seemed that there was some kind of invisible attraction between us, which was difficult to explain, but it was palpable. It was not just a communication between the seller and the customer, but something more, elusive, but at the same time sincere. At some point, we exchanged contact information. It was unexpected for both of them, two strangers, one of whom was selling jewelry, and the other was looking for a gift. But, as it often happens, we were just attracted to each other. We exchanged phone numbers, and despite my busy schedule, talking to Oliver became an inevitable part of my day. We started dating, although rarely, because life did not stop demanding time and attention. But every time I saw him, I felt that our bond was getting stronger. He was different, calm, confident, but at the same time caring and attentive. I chose one of the most expensive jewelry that Oliver recommended to me, and despite its price, what was more exciting was how exciting this meeting was. We kept in touch, and I began to feel that maybe this person could really become a part of my life. In our busy lives, filled with daily routine and worries, it was not easy to find time for such meetings, but I realized that I could not afford to miss this chance. We quickly started a relationship, and everything seemed to go so naturally that I didn't even have time to figure out how it happened. Oliver has become a part of my life, a part of me. Every day spent with him gave us new sensations, and although we both understood that we could not rush things, the questions still could not help but arise. What next? And so, after a while, conversations about marriage became inevitable. I was ready to discuss it, but the thought of getting married scared me. It wasn't something I thought about a lot, especially at the age of 29. I still felt like I hadn't lived through all the stages of life that were expected of me. However, as soon as I started talking about it with my mom, her reaction surprised me. She wasn't shocked. She was glad. "I thought you looked more animated lately," she said, smiling. "You found someone, and it's wonderful. I'm glad you're thinking about getting married." Her words didn't cause any shock or doubt, and it was probably the most calm and confident thing I've ever heard in a conversation about such personal things. As always, she supported me, despite all her worries about the future. It was as if she knew that this moment was inevitable. "I would like to meet him," she added, and I felt my heart touched by this sincerity. And so, I introduced Oliver to Mom. We were sitting in the living room, and after a few minutes of awkward silence, my mother said, "I always knew you deserved someone to make you happy, Kat. Are you happy?" This question was the whole point of what was happening in my life. I felt Oliver take my hand, squeezing it as if he wanted to confirm his intentions. He said it so confidently that I was sure of his words. "I will definitely make Catherine happy. Please let me marry her." My mother and I couldn't hide our smiles. That was the moment when I realized that everything I had dreamed of was becoming a reality. This man, whom I met quite by accident, was now a part of my world. Mom was happy. She didn't say anything superfluous, but her eyes expressed everything. He was someone you could trust. Even though our dating period wasn't that long, I knew it wasn't just a coincidence, not an accident. It was about fate, about what was meant to be. My mother understood this and was genuinely happy for us. After that, I decided to go meet Oliver's family. We went to his house with him. It was a quiet residential area where houses stood along narrow streets surrounded by greenery. When I entered the house, his mother met me. She looked at me intently, and I felt her gaze slide over me, as if she was trying to figure out who I was, what kind of person I was. She didn't say a word, but after a few seconds she did. "I heard that Oliver wants to get married. I'm curious about what kind of person you are." Her words weren't mean, but there was a certain tension in them, and I couldn't help feeling that she was disappointed or wary of something. Then she added, "You're being completely honest, which doesn't happen that often." I was expecting to see someone bright, assertive. So it's a surprise to me. Her words, as I now understand them, were not so much a criticism as an attempt to get into me. However, she was so straightforward and outspoken that I felt uncomfortable. Oliver immediately intervened, trying to soften the atmosphere. He took a step towards his mother and said with a soft smile, "Mom, this is too rude." "Nice to meet you, Kat." He said it with the words I would have expected from him, caring and tolerant. But I noticed that he was also a little tense, as if he was trying not to upset his mother. Perhaps he knew how difficult such moments were for her, and how much she could experience changes in her life. However, I couldn't hide my excitement. That was the moment when I began to realize how important it was to be a part of this family. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was obvious: my relationship with Oliver, my feelings, my experiences, it all had something to do with becoming a part of his world, and he was a part of mine. I'm Catherine, and I'm dating Oliver, with the prospect of marriage in mind. But, as often happens, what seems perfect at first glance soon begins to take on new, more complex outlines. This conversation with his mother was not just a test for me, but a real test of the strength of my feelings and expectations. Oh, I've already heard about it from Oliver. He often mentioned that his mother knew about everything that was going on in our lives, and that, of course, she would be glad to be aware of all our plans. He even said that she supports our relationship. But the moment I met her, I realized that it wasn't quite like that. She interrupted me as soon as I started talking and looked at me with that same cold sarcasm that made me feel uncomfortable. An unpleasant man, I thought, pursing my lips. Yes, that description was perfect for her. It seems that all her views on life were tough and without compromise. She said it bluntly: I have no objections to marriage, but Oliver and I plan to live together. We're thinking about buying a new apartment as soon as you both get married. Let's live there, all three of us. I froze for a second. These words startled me. Not only did she say that she would live with us after our wedding, but she also offered a completely different version of the future that I dreamed of. She continued without a pause, without giving me time to think: if you can't accept this, then maybe marriage is out of the question. I was stunned. This conversation unfolded in a way I couldn't have imagined. It became clear to me that Oliver and his mother seemed to have planned this from the very beginning. All these thoughts about the future, about living together, they had already thought of it in advance for both of us, prescribed everything as a script. I had no choice but to follow them. They literally handed me the money for the apartment they were planning to buy for us. When I saw that luxurious 4-room high-rise, her words were confirmed. It was an incredibly luxurious apartment, with all the amenities and gorgeous views of the city. There was not only wealth in its interior, but also rigid thoughtfulness. This apartment was not just a place where we had to live. She was rather a symbol of what awaits me, not just marriage, but a life in which I had to play a role that was not chosen by me. The three of us were supposed to live in this house, in this multi-story apartment. Yeah, didn't I mention that? Said Oliver, with apparent ease, as if this situation was the norm. I can't separate from my mom, even after the wedding. I'm worried about her, so if you decide to marry me, living with my mom is inevitable. His words sounded so calm that I felt a sense of confusion. He talked about it as a fact that I had to come to terms with. Realizing that my future husband would not only not offer me independence, but would also make decisions for me, made me feel small, unable to change anything. I knew that my answer was crucial at that moment. But how could one respond when feelings were mixed with confusion? At that moment, I was uneasy. I felt like I couldn't find the words to express my thoughts. Oliver's words, full of confidence, made me feel like I was losing my own independence. He was as kind to me as ever, and looking back, I realized that I believed in his kindness, despite all the difficulties he offered me. I should have said I needed some time to think, I whispered to myself, but even those words weren't mine. They weren't real. It was just a way to postpone the decision without entering into an open confrontation. But when I returned home, my mother was so happy about my marriage that I couldn't bring myself to postpone the conversation, although something in the back of my mind suggested that this conversation might be an insult. Mom was happy because she saw how I was about to enter a new chapter in my life, how I was building my future. Oliver and his mother's family life plan has already begun to come true. Fortunately, The new multi-story apartment was very close to my mother's house. It was convenient. If there are problems, I could quickly visit my mom, and she could come to my apartment. This was, of course, an advantage. But deep down, I felt like I was losing something important. The comfort that I had built around myself, the little world that I had created with my mother, was all gone. I couldn't achieve the life I wanted. As soon as we started living together, my mother-in-law announced that from now on I would have to take over all the household duties. "Catherine, you understand, from now on you will take care of my daily needs, do the laundry and, of course, cook food," she said with almost theatrical seriousness. Her words left no room for doubt. "I'm counting on you," she added, and seemed to expect me to do everything she said immediately. I expected that I would soon get tired of all this, that there would be a time when I would no longer be able to tolerate such authoritarian control, but it never occurred to me how deeply her interference would penetrate into my life. The mother-in-law began to behave completely abnormally. She controlled my every move, as if I were part of her property. She strictly ensured that I did not communicate with my mother. Yes, it became a taboo topic in our house. My mother had no right to visit us, and even simple calls became rare, because every time it caused hostility on her part. The most shocking thing for me was that I had to take on all the household expenses. She stated it bluntly, "You understand who you have to thank for living in this luxurious apartment, and from now on, never forget about your gratitude." These words made me feel as if I was forced to justify myself for what, in fact, was my right, to live in a place that I helped to arrange. In her eyes, I was not the equal owner of this house. She did not recognize my contribution to the household, believing that her son, my husband, was the only provider of resources and life. Her words became increasingly harsh and discouraging. "You may be satisfied with the small amount you earn on your computer, but it's useless for us. What's the use of this little thing?" She said it as if my existence in this house didn't matter if I didn't bring a lot of money into the house. I was shocked by her cynicism. I didn't understand how it could be so easy to ignore the real efforts that I put into our common home, because I had to work and maintain everyday life. I thought about showing her the bills for utilities, furniture, and household appliances, but decided that I would talk to my husband first. Doesn't he realize that this situation is unfair? Why doesn't your mother know that I support the household? She criticizes me every day, says that I live at her expense, and she doesn't seem to recognize at all that I play an important role in how things work here. She even underestimated my income, what was going on. It was a real challenge for me. I asked Oliver about it. "Why doesn't your mother see that I'm supporting the house?" She continues to criticize me, while it seems that she considers me a dependent. He looked at me with a strange expression, and then said with complete confidence, "Are you worried about what she thinks? It doesn't matter what Mom thinks. In fact, the credit for getting this apartment partly belongs to me. That's why it's natural for her to think that way." His words startled me. I realized at that moment that it wasn't really my fault at all, that Oliver didn't see it as my effort. He said it as if the apartment was not our common goal, but solely the result of his work. And what is most surprising, he did not consider it necessary to interfere in the relationship with his mother. "You worry too much," he added with a light laugh, as if it was just a misunderstanding. He did not offer me any help, did not express the slightest regret that I had to face such an attitude. We continued talking, but he changed the subject, as if my feelings didn't matter. Then I felt my trust in him begin to crumble. He used to be so attentive, so caring. But since we got married, his attitude towards me has changed. He became more detached, less involved in the issues that concerned me directly. His endless laughter at the situation when I needed support felt like a stab in the back. I was confused, and the feeling of loneliness that gripped me grew stronger every day. Resentment towards my mother-in-law grew every day, but even more painful was the fact that I could not find support from Oliver. My husband, whom I considered my ally, turned out to be just a part of this system that was strangling me. I felt like I was losing my identity, like I was out of place in a world where I wasn't taken seriously. And no matter how hard I tried to come to terms with this situation, every day this life became more and more unbearable. One day he came home, visibly agitated, almost beaming with pride. He was holding the keys to the car he had just bought. It was a luxurious, expensive model, which, as he eagerly explained, was perfect for our new home. "I bought a luxury car suitable for this apartment," he said, with a peaceful expression on his face. "It's on credit, but it's better than a compact car, right?" "That's cool," he added with a confident smile, as if I had to share his delight. I stood in front of him, confused. He talked about it as if buying a car was something I would have to approve without question. Since we moved into this luxurious apartment, my husband's lifestyle has changed beyond recognition. He had never seemed materialistic before. He was a modest, reserved person who appreciated simplicity and did not pay attention to brands. But now everything is different. He started buying custom-made suits, luxury shoes, expensive watches, wallets, and now a car. And all this without the slightest consultation with me. "Are you sure about the payments?" I asked, holding back my indignation. "I can't take on the costs anymore. We haven't transferred a penny." I tried to say everything I was thinking, but before I could finish the sentence, he interrupted me. "Shut up." His voice was full of anger, which really stunned me. "What are you even thinking about? Who do you think you are? Remember who you have to thank for marrying me at all. If I hadn't approached you, you would still be sitting at your mom's house, working remotely." These words pierced me like a knife. I couldn't believe he'd said that. It was as if he had wiped our entire history, all our intimacy, from his face, and in an instant turned me into an insignificant part of his life. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. My indignation boiled over. "Stop joking, Oliver. Who do you think should be grateful for expensive purchases without any consultation? This is crazy." I started screaming, unable to contain my anger. "This is crazy," I repeated, no longer caring what I said. He just grinned back, waving me off as if I were just a moody woman. But at that moment, my words became louder and fiercer. I could no longer hide the irritation that accumulated in me with every decision he made, with every new empty step he took, not considering it necessary to know my opinion. And as if that wasn't enough, my mother-in-law appeared in the midst of our argument. As always, she was at the right time to intervene. When she saw us in the midst of a quarrel, she came up and, with obvious contempt, said, "What kind of attitude is that, Catherine? Why are you acting like this?" She didn't even try to figure out what was going on between us, but she immediately started on me, accusing me of being, as always, to blame for what was happening. I was stunned by her words. It was so unexpected and shameless that I couldn't even answer right away. "I'm listening, and I've had enough spending money so lavishly on my sins." "Just go away, you're in the way," she continued, not giving me a chance to explain. I stood there, gritting my teeth, and couldn't figure out why all this was happening. She didn't listen to me at all, didn't try to understand what kind of difficulties I was going through, but instead blamed me, as if I was the cause of all this chaos. My mother-in-law's words sounded as if she did not see me as an equal person, but only something like a rough stone that stands in the way of her impeccable life. "Oliver told me everything," she continued, her voice now cool and commanding. "I know all about how you squander his money and even got into debt. We don't need such an economic parasite. Just go away." I was stunned by her bluntness, her accusations, and all I could do was stand there like I was paralyzed, not knowing how to react. Her words pierced me like a cold knife. How did it happen that I ended up in this situation? I was trying to figure out what had happened, what I had done wrong. But all I could hear were endless reproaches, accusations, and threats to leave the house if I didn't agree to her terms. At that moment, I realized that not only my life, but also my relationship with Oliver, with his family, was on the verge of destruction. I planned to endure the harassment of my mother-in-law, hoping that over time she would somehow calm down, and our family life would return to normal. But my husband's betrayal was beyond my imagination, and it turned everything around. In fact, I didn't live in luxury, I wasn't in debt. On the contrary, those who spent money were them, these ungrateful people. Every step they took was aimed at consolidating their power, expanding their possessions at my expense. It was all so absurd that it became difficult for me to understand how I could not have seen it before. My husband, who once seemed so kind and caring, confirmed his mother's words without taking my side. He said with a laugh, as if everything that was happening was some kind of game, "What are you going to do? Will you apologize or leave? If you leave, I won't stop you, but remember, it means divorce." His words struck me like the edge of a knife. I couldn't believe that he betrayed me so easily, without any remorse, just put me out on the street as an unnecessary thing. I couldn't stay in this apartment anymore. I no longer wanted to live in a place that was built on lies and manipulation. "I'm leaving, I don't need the furniture and appliances I paid for," I said, holding back the tremor in my voice. "I'll leave them here. I want to throw it all in your face." But they didn't even understand the whole point of my words. My husband just grinned and continued to play his role. He didn't think about how I was feeling. It wasn't just indifference, it was complete disregard. "Thanks to me, you live in a 4-room apartment, and now all my efforts, my work, my contribution, are left behind," I said, feeling my heart tighten for a moment. But their silence didn't stop me. It was like a shock experience when you realize that you are giving away a piece of yourself, and in return you get nothing but emptiness. I've already made my decision. I couldn't be a part of this house, this life anymore. "Yes, I will file for divorce online. I will do it quickly," I said firmly, although the words seemed heavy to me, as if I was losing something important. I started filling out the divorce papers. My mother-in-law, watching my actions, seemed delighted that I was leaving. Perhaps she did not realize how events would unfold, or maybe her low intelligence did not allow her to understand what would happen next. But I didn't care about their future. I took the completed divorce papers, quickly packed my things and arranged with a lawyer to leave the house without looking back. My mother-in-law continued her sarcastic remarks, as if I was pleased with her presence. To the end, she added mockingly, but I couldn't hear her voice anymore. My husband was standing next to her, and his expression was the same as before, cold and indifferent. He wasn't worried, he wasn't trying to fix anything, to change anything. He just stood there, with an indifferent look, as if it was all something insignificant. "I will file for divorce, there will be no alimony, no division of property," I said, putting the finishing touches on this contract that tore apart everything that had been built between us. "Here are the documents, just sign here." I handed him the papers, expecting neither sympathy nor support. It didn't matter anymore. He signed without hesitation, and I felt like at that moment everything that once seemed important was completely destroyed. I wasn't even sure what he was going through. "I will sign it," he said, and his words, like his actions, did not elicit any reaction from me. I was afraid that he might claim this apartment, the property that I purchased. But as it turned out, I was worried in vain. I silently left the apartment, leaving everything that was dear to me like an empty vessel, without having a drop of regret. I emptied all my bank accounts, even though I knew that I could be criticized for this step. But I didn't care about their condemnation. After all, I knew that every penny in these accounts was earned by my hard work. I wasn't going to stay with them, and I wasn't going to feel guilty. I was ready to face any consequences of this decision, even if it meant leaving my past life behind. When I returned to my mother's house, I felt strangely relieved. Everything that was left behind seemed so far away and impossible now. She greeted me with a surprised expression on her face, as if I were a ghost from the past who had returned to her life. I was worried. I called several times, but I couldn't get through. I even went to your apartment, but they wouldn't let me in. Are you okay? What kind of call is that? Her words carried a wave of alarm and surprise. I froze for a moment, feeling the cold feeling of anxiety creep into me again. I checked my phone and was horrified when I discovered that my mother's number was set to reject incoming calls. It was impossible. How could they go so far as to prevent me from contacting her? It was beyond my strength. It was downright sinister, as if they were trying to completely isolate me from reality, forcing me to abandon the very foundation on which I could rely, my mother. I told her everything that had happened since I moved into the world they had created, dark and full of lies. I didn't hide a single detail, nor how they turned my life around, how they turned me into a toy in their hands. Even my usually gentle mother, who always tried not to interfere in my problems, showed anger and shock this time. "It's not too terrible, it's unbelievable," she said, trying to make sense of what was happening. But all she could say didn't seem to be enough to ease my mind. We were sitting in her old, cozy house, and it was hard for me to believe that I had returned here, to this warm corner that had once been my refuge from all external storms. "But without you, they cannot continue to live in this multi-story apartment," she added, accusing me of allowing their manipulations to ruin my life. It was hard for me to hear that, but deep down I knew she was right. I didn't have to put up with their game, with their control grip. So why did I keep putting up with it? The next day, I went to the office and filed for divorce. The registration was quick, without any problems. When I returned home, I felt better. With every page, with every stroke in these papers, I felt all the heaviness that had been weighing on my soul for so long let go. This divorce was not just a legal act, it was a moment of liberation. The moment when I finally got rid of everything that connected me to this darkness. The brief and painful union that I once called marriage has been completed. I stood on the wreckage and had no regrets. My mind stabilized, and I could focus again on what was important to me, my job and ensuring a stable income. I started building my life anew, not afraid of what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know what was waiting for me, but now I didn't have to live in anticipation of betrayal. I became the mistress of my own destiny. And so, as expected, at the end of the month I got a call. Of course, it was this stupid couple. The voice of Oliver, my ex-husband, sounded through the phone, and I felt the cold come over me again. He started with a vague phrase, as if he was embarrassed, but soon his words became clear and understandable. "Hi, Catherine, it's me, Oliver. I'm in a bit of a quandary, and I need yours help." His voice trembled slightly, but it was the same voice that once promised so much. He continued without giving me time to intervene. "We are currently struggling with the mortgage of the apartment, and also with the payment of utility bills. I was forced to sell a new car and pawn my branded watch, but it's still not enough. So please help us, help me." I couldn't believe my ears. That was what I was afraid of. They found themselves on the brink again, once again unable to cope with their own decisions and debt obligations. And now they turned to me, to someone who had once been so easily betrayed, for help. For helping them with their own financial difficulties. They wanted me to become their savior again, to return to the role in which I once endlessly endured their manipulations and evasions. The answer was as simple as ever. I wasn't going back to this hell. The words of his request did not move me. I didn't feel guilty, I didn't feel regret. My life was under my control now, and I wasn't going to give it back. I wasn't going to be part of their game again. "I'm begging you," Oliver said, his voice trembling as if he had just woken up from a heavy sleep. "Please, Catherine, help us, I can't take it anymore." His words, although they expressed despair, could not awaken in me the feeling of compassion that I once had for him. As expected, the situation has not improved. They delayed the payments for the apartment, and it seems they couldn't even pay the utility bills. I heard his voice becoming more and more confused, as the echoes of his past promises disappeared into the void. I knew that their situation had become critical, and although deep down I was sorry, I could not forget how they had deceived me, how they seemed to use me for their own benefit, and now that their lives had gone downhill, they decided to resort to me again. Oh, what a pity! If we were still married, maybe I would really feel obligated to help. But now I was free, and not only legally, I was free from their manipulation and betrayal. Our divorce was finalized, and I was no longer part of their game. I'm not generous enough to lend money to a stranger, I said, trying to stay calm, but a storm was raging inside me. Why would you come to me with this request? Why did they think I had to help them with their financial difficulties when they didn't spare me in their arrogance and cruelty? I'm sorry to hear, I continued, trying to hide the indignation in my voice. But now we're divorced, and I can't help you. Maybe you could ask your mom for help? At these words, as I expected, my mother-in-law could not restrain herself. I could hear her grumbling angrily from the background, and the next moment the phone passed into her hands. What's the matter with you, Catherine? Why are you so cold? Can't you help your ex, family in trouble? Her voice was full of accusations, as always, seeking to blame me for what was happening in their lives. You won't gain anything by holding a grudge against us. You're the lowest person if you keep this up. It seemed to me that her words were driving me crazy. I could feel how she was trying to manipulate my feelings, how she was exposing herself and Oliver as victims of circumstances. But I wasn't going to give in to her provocations. It was my money, he blurted back. You, who kicked me out of the house, have no right to talk about help. You, Catherine, are no longer part of our family. Her words and his repeated complaint became more and more ridiculous, and I couldn't hold back any longer. Previously, I had intended to remain calm, but now even my strongest attempts to regain my composure could not help. I felt righteous anger filling my body. I couldn't believe that they were still lying, that they were still trying to take advantage of my kindness, even after I left them. If you keep this up, I said with cold determination, I'll bill you for all the living expenses, for everything I've paid for you over the years. I could hear the silence on the other end of the line. The words I said hurt them both, and surprisingly, they hurt them much more than I expected. Wait, please don't do this, his voice sounded much weaker now. We just have financial problems. We're looking for help, we didn't mean to. Yes, please don't burden us anymore, his mother-in-law's voice interrupted, also full of anxiety. We promise not to bother you anymore, we won't ask you anymore. And despite their attempts to apologize, their words sounded empty. The absurdity of their proposals, their attempts to win back my favor, made me feel only disgust. Did they think that a simple apology could change everything that happened? And yet, despite the fact that they apologized, I still felt the bitterness of their hypocrisy, and I knew that their problems were not mine. I decided to put an end to these troubles, and now that their requests for help no longer sounded on my phone, I felt like the weight that was weighing on my soul became a little lighter. I'm leaving it this time, I told myself, determined not to return to the days when my life was full of manipulation and betrayal. But if you contact me again, I will bill you for all past living expenses. Quietly, without unnecessary emotion, I ended the conversation, knowing that I had done everything I could. In response, I heard only repentant words, "Okay, we understand. I'm sorry, we won't bother you anymore." And I felt their presence, which had been a part of my life for a long time, leaving, disappearing, dissolving into emptiness. A wise silence followed their words, and I decided that now I needed to sever all ties. I blocked their numbers, no longer allowing their voices to enter my life. Not believing my luck, I thought that now they would finally leave me alone. I expected them to pursue me more persistently, trying to make me feel guilty by manipulating my kindness. But it turned out that their situation was indeed much worse than I could have imagined. They seemed to be in a deep financial impasse. One day, A few days after our conversation, my mother told me that she saw Oliver and his mother packing up their things and leaving the apartment building. Their faces were devastated, their eyes dull, not a trace of the old arrogance they were so proud of. They looked absolutely miserable, like those who had lost not only money, but also their pride. There was a sense of desperation in their gait. Everything became clear. They could no longer afford to live in this apartment, which they had so thoughtlessly purchased, and could not cope with mortgage payments and utility bills. It seems that their lives turned out to be much more difficult than they allowed themselves to think when they sat on this proud pedestal. I felt some satisfaction that, despite all their efforts to squeeze the last of my strength out of me, their fate eventually turned out to be natural. Just desserts, as someone who believes in justice would say. Oliver, working in a jewelry store, did not earn anywhere near the money they needed to maintain this luxurious facade. He finally realized that this whole life, all these things, the apartment that he considered his pride, were possible only thanks to me, my work and my efforts. But now that I was gone, it was too late for him to figure it out. I let them go. I returned to myself, to what was my real home, my mother's house. Every day I felt my heart fill with peace and my mind find harmony again. But I wasn't going to stop there. I started planning a new phase of my life. It was time to start all over again, to focus on finding your way again. And for that, I needed a space that would reflect my inner state. I was thinking about moving to a barrier-free luxury home where both my mom and I could feel safe and comfortable. I was in no hurry. I wanted to find a place that would really suit both of us. My mother supported me. She has always been my mainstay, and her words gave me strength. "Catherine, you have always done your job well. Keep up the good work. I am here to support you." These words, filled with warmth and confidence, became the incentive that I needed in order not to deviate from my intended goal. There was such confidence in her voice, such faith in me, that I felt a spark of determination light up in my heart again. I am determined to work, and to create the life I deserve, the life that will now be mine and mine alone.